The Chicago skyline glittered like a jagged crown against the night sky, its lights reflecting off the glassy surface of Lake Michigan. On the 32nd floor of Pinnacle Ventures, a sleek tower of ambition and secrets, the world moved in hushed efficiency. Elevators hummed, polished shoes clicked against marble, and the air smelled faintly of espresso and power. But down the hall, in a dimly lit copy room, 16-year-old Maya Williams knelt beside a humming machine, her hands sorting through a stack of papers left behind like forgotten whispers. Maya wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Her mother, Denise, worked the night shift, scrubbing desks and vacuuming boardrooms to keep their small apartment's lights on. Maya tagged along sometimes, slipping into the shadows with a visitor's badge clipped to her faded denim jacket. She wasn't invisible, not exactly, but no one noticed the girl with braided hair and thrift store sneakers. Not the executives in their tailored suits, not the security guards scrolling on their phones. And that was fine by her. Maya had always preferred watching to being seen. Tonight, though, something caught her eye. A folder, half open, sat abandoned, in the copy machine's output tray. Its cover was stamped in bold red ink, "Confidential. Merger proposal." Maya's fingers hesitated. She glanced down the hall, where her mother's vacuum droned like a distant lullaby. "Don't touch their stuff," Denise's warning echoed in her mind, but curiosity wasn't what pulled her hand forward. It was instinct, sharp and unyielding like the tug of a tide. She flipped open the folder. Pages of dense legal text stared back, words like indemnification and contingent liability swimming in her vision. Maya wasn't a lawyer, but she wasn't just any teenager either. While her classmates scrolled through TikTok, she devoured true crime podcasts and dissected corporate scandals in her school's debate club. Last year, she'd won first place in an essay contest with a piece called "The Hidden Cost of Greed." Her grandfather used to say she had an old soul with sharp eyes. Tonight, those eyes narrowed. Buried on page 17 in a paragraph so dry it could have been wallpaper, was a single line that made her heart skip. "All liabilities arising from merger disputes shall be borne solely by Pinnacle Ventures." Maya blinked, reread it, then flipped to the next page. The clause was clever, dressed up in legal jargon, but it was a blade in disguise. If this merger went south, lawsuits, fraud, anything, Pinnacle Ventures would take the fall, while the other, Party Vaughn Enterprises, walked away spotless. "Mom," Maya whispered, hurrying down the hall. Denise was wiping down a glass conference table, her face etched with exhaustion. "You ever see a contract that hands over everything like this?" She held out the folder, her voice low but urgent. Denise didn't even glance at it. "Maya, what did I tell you? Leave their papers alone. You want us both fired?" "But this could ruin the company. Mr. Hale's company." Denise's eyes flashed. "And we're not the Hales. We're the ones who clean their messes, not make them." She turned back to her work, but Maya's mind was already racing, piecing together a puzzle no one else seemed to see. The next morning, the boardroom on the 32nd floor buzzed with tension. Jackson Hale, CEO of Pinnacle Ventures, sat at the head of a mahogany table, his silver hair catching the morning light. His wife, Clara Hale, stood beside him, her smile as polished as the diamond studs in her ears. Across from them, Derek Vaughn, a Texan businessman with a grin too wide for the room, slid a contract toward Jackson. "This is the deal of a lifetime, Jack," Derek said, his drawl smooth as whiskey. "Sign this and we're rewriting the future." The young executives around the table nodded, their tablets glowing with charts and projections. But Maya, standing just outside the glass doors in her borrowed janitor's uniform, felt her pulse hammer. She'd slipped into the meeting unnoticed, her mother's badge dangling from her neck. The contract on the table was the same one she'd found last night, and Jackson's pen was inches from signing it. "Stop." Maya's voice cut through the room like a cracked whip. Every head turned. Clara's smile froze. Derek's eyes narrowed and Jackson's pen paused midair. Maya stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. "Page 17, Clause 4B. It's a trap. If you sign that, Pinnacle takes all the risk, every lawsuit, every debt. It's on you. Vaughn Enterprises gets a free pass." The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels like the moment before a storm. A junior executive coughed. Another pulled the contract closer, flipping to page 17. Clara's laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. Who is this girl? The janitor's kid? But Jackson's gaze locked on Maya, his brows furrowing. You're saying this clause shifts liability? Yes, sir, Maya said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. It's written to sound standard, but it's not. If anything goes wrong, your company's the one that burns. Derek leaned back, his grin still in place but tighter now. With all due respect, are we really listening to a teenager over a deal we've vetted for months? Jackson didn't answer. He flipped to page 17, his eyes scanning the text. The room held its breath. Then slowly he set the pen down. I need a moment to review this, he said, his voice low but firm. Clara's hand tightened on her purse. Jackson, this is absurd. But he wasn't listening. His eyes were still on Maya, and for a fleeting moment she saw something in them. Not dismissal, but curiosity, maybe even respect. As security escorted her out, Maya's heart pounded, but she held her head high. She'd lit a spark in a room, full of shadows, and now the question was, would it ignite or would it be snuffed out before anyone noticed the flames? The fluorescent lights of Pinnacle Ventures' security office buzzed like a swarm of restless bees. Maya sat on a stiff metal chair, her denim jacket slung over her shoulders, the visitor's badge still pinned crookedly to its lapel. Across, from her, Denise clutched a styrofoam coffee cup, her knuckles pale against the dark liquid inside. The silence between them was heavier than the Chicago wind howling outside the tower's glass walls. An hour ago, they'd been pulled off the night shift with no explanation, just a curt order to wait downstairs. Maya's stomach churned, not with fear, but with the weight of what she'd done. I'm sorry, Mom, Maya whispered, her voice barely cutting through the hum of the lights. I didn't mean to mess things up. Denise's eyes, tired and sharp, flicked up. You didn't just mess things up, Maya. You walked into a boardroom like you owned it. You think these people play fair? Her voice was low, each word clipped with worry. I clean their floors to keep us fed, not so you can poke a hornet's nest. Maya looked down at her sneakers, scuffed and worn from nights trailing her mother through these halls. I couldn't let him sign it, Mom. That contract. It would have destroyed everything Mr. Hale built. Denise's sigh was heavy, like she was exhaling years of exhaustion. You're 16, you're supposed to be worrying about algebra, not corporate conspiracies. Before Maya could respond, the door swung open. A woman in a crisp blazer, HR badge gleaming, stepped in. Mrs. Williams, she said, her tone as cold as the marble lobby outside. You're on administrative leave, effective immediately. We'll contact you regarding next steps. She didn't even glance at Maya. Denise stood, her shoulders stiff, and grabbed Maya's arm. Let's go. As they stepped into the biting Chicago air, Maya stole one last look at the towering glass facade of Pinnacle Ventures. The place she'd thought she could change now loomed like a fortress shutting her out. 32 floors above, Jackson Hale sat alone in his corner office, the unsigned contract spread across his desk like a map to a battlefield. The clause Maya had pointed out, page 17 4B, stared back at him, its words now glaringly sinister. How had he missed it? How had his entire legal team missed it? He traced the line with his finger, his jaw tightening. All liabilities, borne solely by Pinnacle Ventures. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a landmine, planted with precision. His phone buzzed. Clara's name flashed on the screen. He hesitated, then answered. You didn't sign it, did you? Her voice was smooth, almost too smooth, like polished glass hiding a crack. No, Jackson said flatly. I'm having it reviewed. Clara's laugh was light, but it didn't reach her tone. Jackson, you're overreacting. We've been through this deal 100 times. That girl's got you spooked over nothing. She saw something we didn't, he said, his voice steady but edged with doubt. And I'm starting to wonder, why? There was a pause, just long enough for Jackson to notice. She's a kid, Jackson, Clara said, softer now. Don't let her make you question me. He didn't reply. The call ended, and Jackson's gaze drifted to a framed photo. On his desk, him and Clara, smiling at a gala years ago, back when trust was a given, not a question. Now that photo felt like a relic from a different life. Across town, Maya sat on the sagging couch in their small apartment, the city's hum filtering through the cracked window. Her phone pinged, pulling her from her thoughts. An email? No. Sender name, just a subject line. You were right. Her pulse quickened. She opened it. A single line. Check the third clause in every Vaughn Enterprises contract. You'll see the pattern. R.B. Maya's eyes widened. R.B. Robert Barnes, a name she'd heard whispered among the cleaning crew. A former analyst, at Pinnacle, fired 2 years ago for asking too many questions. She opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys as she dug into public records. It didn't take long. 3 past mergers, all tied to Derek Vaughn, all with the same sneaky clause buried in fine print. Each time, the other company collapsed under lawsuits or debt, while Vaughn Enterprises walked away richer. "Mom," Maya called, her voice urgent. Denise was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, her face still tight with worry. "This isn't just about Pinnacle. It's bigger. They've done this before." Denise set the spoon down hard. "Maya, enough. You're not a detective. You're my daughter, and I need you safe." But Maya's mind was already elsewhere, racing through the implications. If she was right, Derek Vaughn wasn't just a slick businessman. He was a predator, and Pinnacle was his next prey. And Clara? Her polished smiles and quick dismissals felt less innocent by the second. Back at Pinnacle, Jackson stood at his office window, the city sprawling below like a chessboard. He opened his laptop and pulled up old emails from Robert Barnes, flagged and ignored 2 years ago. One subject line caught his eye: Vaughn contracts, hidden risks. He clicked, and there it was, a warning about liability clauses, buried in jargon, dismissed by his board. By Clara. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Keep digging and you'll lose more than a deal." Jackson's grip tightened. He didn't know who sent it, but he knew one thing. Maya Williams had just pulled the first thread in a tapestry of lies, and now the whole thing was starting to unravel. As Maya closed her laptop, a shadow passed her window. A figure, too quick to make out, gone before she could blink. Her heart thudded, but she didn't flinch. She'd lit a spark, and now something was moving in the dark. Would it come for her next? Or would she outrun it before it could strike? The Chicago dawn painted the city in hues of pink and gold. But inside Maya Williams's cramped apartment, the air felt heavy with secrets. Maya sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop glowing in the dim light, its screen filled with spreadsheets and public records she'd spent all night piecing together. The email from Robert Barnes, R.B., had been a spark, but now she was chasing a fire. 3 past mergers tied to Derek Vaughn's company, each one leaving a trail of bankruptcies and broken dreams, all shielded by the same sneaky liability clause she'd found in Pinnacle Ventures' contract. Her fingers trembled as she typed, not from fear but from the weight of what she was uncovering. "Maya, you need to sleep," Denise said, her voice soft but firm from the doorway. She held a mug of chamomile tea, her eyes red from a sleepless night of her own. "You're digging into things that could get us both in trouble." Maya looked up, her braids falling over one shoulder. "Mom, this isn't just about Pinnacle. Vaughn's done this before, 3 times. Companies collapsed, people lost their jobs, and he walked away with millions. If I don't keep going, who will?" Denise set the mug down with a sigh. "You're my kid, not a hero. Heroes don't always win, Maya." But Maya's gaze was already back on the screen where a new email from RB had just popped up. "Meet me at Harold Washington Library, 9 a.m. Bring what you found. Trust no one else." Her heart raced. Robert Barnes wasn't just a name anymore. He was a lifeline. Across town in the glass and steel fortress of Pinnacle Ventures, Jackson Hale stood at his office window, the city's skyline stretching out like a challenge. The unsigned contract still lay on his desk, its pages now marked with yellow highlighter and sticky notes. Last night's text, "Keep digging and you'll lose more than a deal," had kept him awake, not because it scared him, but because it confirmed what Maya had seen. Someone was hiding something big, and that someone might be closer than he wanted to admit. His phone buzzed. Clara again. "Jackson, we need to talk," she said, her voice a mix of urgency and charm. "You're letting this get out of hand. Meet me at the cafe on Michigan Avenue. Let's fix this." Jackson's jaw tightened. "I'm busy, Clara. We'll talk later." He hung up before she could reply, his eyes drifting to the old emails from Robert Barnes he'd pulled up last night. One line stood out, written 2 years ago. "Vaughn's deals are a house of cards. Check the offshore accounts." Jackson hadn't listened then. He wasn't making that mistake again. At 9 a.m., Maya slipped into the Harold Washington Library, her backpack slung over one shoulder, the folder of printed records clutched tightly to her chest. The library's towering atrium felt like a sanctuary, its shelves lined with knowledge no one could take away. She found Robert Barnes in a quiet corner of the computer lab, a man in his late 40s with graying hair and eyes that darted like he was expecting a shadow to move. "You're Maya," he said, not a question. "You're braver than I was." She slid the folder across the table. 3 mergers, same clause, same outcome. Vaughn's been playing this game for years. But I found something else. Transfers. To a shell company called Ravencross Holdings, registered in Belize. Clara Hale's name is on 2 of them. Barnes's face tightened. "Clara? I warned Jackson about her 2 years ago, but he didn't want to hear it. Love blinds you that way." He handed her a USB drive. "This has more. Bank statements, emails, even a draft of a 4th merger Vaughn tried to push through. Last year. It's all connected." Maya's eyes widened as she pocketed the drive. "Why'd you stop working at Pinnacle?" Barnes leaned closer, his voice low. "I didn't stop. They pushed me out when I got too close to the truth." "Be careful, Maya. They're watching you now." Meanwhile, Jackson sat in a dimly lit diner on the edge of the city, across from Victoria Chan, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking down giants. Her black coat hung on the chair and her sharp eyes studied Jackson like he was a puzzle she'd already half solved. "You're not just dealing with a bad contract," she said, sipping her coffee. "This is organized. Fraud, maybe even racketeering. Vaughn's built a career on it, and Clara's not just along for the ride, she's steering." Jackson's fingers tightened around his mug. "Clara's my wife, Victoria. I need proof, not theories." "Then start with this." Victoria slid a tablet across the table, open to a bank record showing a $1.2 million transfer from Pinnacle's reserve account to Ravencross Holdings authorized by Clara Hale. "Your wife's been moving money offshore for years." Maya saw it first, didn't she? Jackson's breath caught. "She's 16, a kid. How does she see what my entire board missed?" Victoria's smile was faint but warm. "Sometimes it takes an outsider to see the cracks in the castle. She's not just a kid, Jackson, she's your wake-up call." Back at the library, Maya's phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "You're playing a dangerous game, janitor's girl." Her pulse spiked, but she didn't flinch. She tucked the USB drive deeper into her pocket and glanced at Barnes. "They know I'm here, don't they?" He nodded, his face grim. "They always know. But you've got something they don't. Guts. Use them wisely." As Maya stepped out into the chilly morning, the city felt different, like it was holding its breath. She'd found allies in the shadows, but the threats were closing in. Would her courage be enough to keep the truth alive? Or would the wolves circling her strike before she could share what she'd found? The Chicago River shimmered under the city's neon glow, but in the narrow alley behind Maya Williams' apartment building, the darkness felt alive. Maya stood frozen on the fire escape, her breath catching as she stared at the street below. Moments ago, she'd glimpsed a figure, hooded, quick, slipping into the shadows after lingering too long near their mailbox. Her fingers tightened around the USB drive Robert Barnes had given her, its weight heavier than ever. The text from earlier still burned in her mind. "You're playing a dangerous game, janitor's girl." Inside, Denise was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear, arguing with the landlord about a sudden maintenance fee notice slipped under their door. "This isn't a coincidence, Maya," she said, hanging up with a scowl. "They're trying to squeeze us out. You stirred something up and now they're pushing back." Maya didn't argue. She slipped the USB into her laptop and opened. The files Barnes had sent: bank statements, encrypted emails, and a timeline of Vaughn Enterprises' shady deals. One name kept popping up: Raven Cross Holdings. And tied to it in fine print was Clara Hale. A $1.5 million transfer here, a $2 million deposit there, all funneled through offshore accounts in Belize. Maya's stomach twisted. Clara wasn't just complicit, she was the architect. "Maya, you need to stop," Denise said, her voice cracking. "This isn't a game. These people don't play fair." But Maya's eyes were locked on the screen, where an email from Clara to Derek Vaughn glowed like a warning flare. "He's asking questions. Move the funds before he looks closer. Dated 3 days ago." Maya's heart raced. She wasn't just fighting for Pinnacle Ventures anymore. She was fighting for every worker like her mom, every invisible person caught in the crosshairs of greed. Across the city, in a sleek penthouse overlooking Lakeshore Drive, Clara Hale stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, her navy silk dress catching the city's lights. She swirled a glass of red wine, her movements calm, but her eyes betrayed a storm. Derek Vaughn sat across from her, his polished grin replaced by a hard line. "Jackson's digging," Clara said, her voice low. "He didn't sign, and now he's pulling old files. That girl's in his head." Derek leaned forward, his fingers drumming on the glass coffee table. "The girl's a problem, but she's not the real threat. Jackson is. If he goes public, our whole operation's exposed." Clara's gaze sharpened. "Then we make sure he doesn't. I know my husband. He trusts me, or at least he wants to. We just need to buy time." Derek slid a black folder across the table. "This is our insurance. A list of Pinnacle's investors, their private holdings, their secrets. If Jackson pushes, we leak it. The board will turn on him before he can point fingers." Clara's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. "And the girl?" Derek's eyes darkened. "She's a kid. Kids scare easy. A few more warnings and she'll back off." But Maya wasn't backing off. At dawn, she sat in a quiet coffee shop near the Loop, her backpack heavy with printed records and the USB drive. Robert Barnes slid into the booth across from her, his face pale, a faint bruise on his cheek. "They came for me last night," he said, voice low. "Two guys, no faces, told me to stop talking or I'd lose more than my job." Maya's throat tightened. "Why didn't you run?" Barnes gave a tired smile. "Because you didn't. You're 16, Maya, and you're still here. That's why I'm still here." He handed her a crumpled envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Raven Cross isn't just a shell. It's Clara's endgame. Check the Cayman accounts." Maya's pulse quickened. "You're saying Clara's been planning this for years?" "Longer than you think," Barnes said. "She's not just Derek's partner, she's his equal, maybe more." Meanwhile, Jackson Hale sat in his office, the city's morning hum drowned out by the pounding in his chest. Victoria Chan stood across from him, her tablet open to a new set of bank records. "Clara authorized another transfer last night," Victoria said, her voice steady but urgent. $3 million to Raven Cross Holdings. She's moving fast, Jackson. If you don't act now, she'll bleed Pinnacle dry before you can stop her." Jackson's hands clenched. "She's my wife, Victoria. How do I fight someone I've trusted for 20 years? "You don't fight her," Victoria said. "You fight for the truth. And that starts with protecting Maya. She's the one who saw this coming." Jackson nodded, his gaze drifting to a photo on his desk. Him and Clara at their wedding, her smile bright, his hand on hers. He flipped it face down. "Get me everything you have on Raven Cross. And find Maya. She needs to know she's not alone." That evening, Maya stood outside Pinnacle Ventures, the USB drive burning a hole in her pocket. She'd been barred from entering, but a familiar face, a young intern named Sam, who'd once shared his coffee with her during a late-night cleaning shift, spotted her. "Mr. Hale's looking for you," Sam whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "He said to bring you up, no questions asked." As Maya stepped into the elevator, The doors closing with a soft ding. She felt the weight of eyes on her, not just from the security cameras, but from somewhere deeper, darker. The truth was coming into focus, but so were the claws of those who wanted it buried. Would she reach Jackson before they reached her, or was the trap already closing? The Chicago courthouse stood like a stone giant against the gray morning sky, its steps crowded with reporters and flashing cameras. Inside courtroom 14A, the air was thick with anticipation, the kind that made every whisper feel like a shout. Maya Williams sat in the second row, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her braids neatly tucked behind her ears. She wore a simple navy blazer, borrowed from her mother's closet, but her eyes burned with a fire no one could ignore. Today wasn't just about a contract, it was about truth, and she was its voice. Jackson Hale sat at the plaintiff's table, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light, his face carved with resolve. Beside him, Victoria Chan adjusted her notes, her sharp gaze sweeping the room like a hawk. Across the aisle, Derek Vaughn leaned back in his chair, his tailored suit pristine, his grin a mask of confidence. Clara Hale sat beside him, her slate gray dress impeccable, but her hands betrayed her, clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. The judge entered, and the room stood. "All rise," the bailiff called, and the battle began. Victoria opened. With surgical precision, her voice steady as she laid out the evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not just a case of corporate fraud. It's a calculated scheme to destroy Pinnacle Ventures from within." She presented bank records, emails, and the damning USB drive from Robert Barnes, each piece tying Derek Vaughn and Clara Hale to Ravencross Holdings. 3 prior mergers, 3 ruined companies, all with the same liability clause buried in fine print, and every time, Vaughn Enterprises walked away richer, while Clara Hale authorized the transfers that funded it. The jury leaned forward, their faces a mix of shock and fascination. Clara's eyes stayed fixed on the table, but Derek's grin didn't waver, until Victoria called her first witness. "The court calls Maya Williams." A murmur rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Maya stood, her sneakers silent on the polished floor, and took the stand. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat, her gaze steady. Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. "Miss Williams, tell us how you became involved in this case." Maya took a breath, her voice clear. "I was helping my mom clean Pinnacle Ventures offices. She's on the night crew. I found a contract in the copy room left behind like it didn't matter. But it did. Page 17, Clause 4B. It shifted all the risk to Pinnacle. If anything went wrong, Mr. Hale's company would take the fall, and Vaughn Enterprises would walk away clean." Victoria nodded. "Why did you speak up? You're 16 with no stake in this company." Maya's eyes flicked to Clara, then to the jury. "Because my mom taught me that doing what's right isn't about who you are or where you stand. It's about what you see. And I saw a lie that could hurt people like my mom who work hard and get ignored." The courtroom was silent, every word landing like a stone in still water. Even the judge's expression softened. Victoria pressed on. "What happened after you spoke up?" "They tried to scare me," Maya said. "Notes in my locker, texts from unknown numbers, even a maintenance fee to push us out of our apartment. But I kept digging because the truth doesn't stop just because you're afraid." Derek's attorney rose for cross-examination, his voice dripping with condescension. "Miss Williams, you're a high school student, not a lawyer. Do you really expect this court to believe you understood a complex corporate contract?" Maya didn't blink. "I understood enough to know it was wrong. You don't need a degree to see when someone's setting up someone else to fail." The jury's eyes were glued to her, not as a child, but as a force. A woman in the back row nodded faintly, her face reflecting every worker who'd ever been told to stay quiet. Next, Jackson took the stand. Victoria's question was simple. "Why did you trust Maya's warning?" Jackson paused, his voice low but steady. "I didn't at first. I thought she was just a kid. But then I read the clause she pointed out, and I saw what my board, my wife, had missed, or maybe what they chose not to see. His gaze flickered to Clara, who looked away. Maya reminded me that truth doesn't care about your title. Sometimes it comes from the person cleaning your floors. The courtroom held its breath as Victoria played the final piece of evidence, an audio file, recovered from a deleted server of Clara and Derek in a private call. If Jackson questions it, we remind him what he has to lose, Clara's voice said, cold and calculated. Derek's reply followed. And if the girl keeps digging, we bury her first. Clara's face drained of color. Derek's grin finally cracked. The jury exchanged glances, their pens scratching notes. Victoria turned to Clara, who'd taken the stand last. Mrs. Hale, did you authorize those transfers to Ravencross Holdings? Clara's voice was barely audible. I thought I was protecting our future. I didn't know it would go this far. Victoria's tone sharpened. You didn't know or you didn't care. You signed off on every transfer, every lie, while Maya Williams, a 16-year-old, saw the truth you buried. Clara's eyes closed, her silence louder than any confession. The judge called a recess and Maya stepped outside, the cold air stinging her cheeks. Jackson followed, his voice soft. You didn't just save my company, Maya. You saved me from living a lie. She met his gaze, her voice quiet but firm. I just did what felt right, Mr. Hale. As they stood on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing like a storm, Maya felt the weight of the world watching. The truth was out, but the verdict was still to come. Would justice prevail, or would the shadows of power find a way to strike back one last time? The Chicago skyline glowed golden as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city's glass towers. Inside courtroom 14A, the verdict landed like a thunderclap. The jury forewoman stood, her voice steady but weighted, with finality. On the count of conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, we find the defendants, Clara Hale and Derek Vaughn, guilty. On the count of falsifying financial documents, guilty. On the count of obstruction and tampering with legal contracts, guilty. The words echoed through the silent room. Maya Williams sat between her mother, Denise, and Victoria Chan, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. Her navy blazer felt too big, but her heart felt bigger, swelling with a mix of relief and disbelief. Jackson Hale stood behind them, his face unreadable but his eyes fixed on Clara, who stared at the floor, her once perfect composure shattered. Derek Vaughn's grin was gone, replaced by a cold, hard stare as the judge delivered the sentence. 10 years in federal prison, no parole for 7. Outside, the courthouse steps were a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Maya, how does it feel to take down a corporate empire? One called. Mr. Hale, will Pinnacle Ventures survive? Another shouted. Maya paused, her sneakers rooted to the stone steps. She turned to the nearest microphone, her voice steady. This isn't about taking anyone down. It's about lifting the truth up. No one's too small to make a difference, not even a janitor's daughter. The crowd erupted in cheers, signs waving with slogans like, Truth sees all and Maya's voice matters. Denise squeezed her daughter's hand, her eyes shining with pride and fear. You did it, Maya, she whispered, but I'm still mad you scared me half to death. Maya smiled, a small, quiet thing. Worth it, Mom. Weeks later, Pinnacle Ventures was no longer the fortress of secrets it had been. Jackson Hale stood in the lobby, now lined with new posters announcing the Maya Williams Fellowship for Courage and Insight, a scholarship for young people from overlooked communities. The press conference was packed, cameras rolling as Jackson took the mic. This company was built on ambition, he said, his voice carrying a new kind of strength. But it was saved by integrity. Maya Williams saw what we couldn't, and today we're rebuilding Pinnacle to honor that vision, starting with her. The applause was deafening. Maya stood beside him, her face flushed but her chin high. She didn't speak, but her presence said enough. Later, in Jackson's office, he handed her an envelope. Your acceptance letter from Columbia, he said, a faint smile breaking through. And a personal thank you. You didn't just save my company, Maya. You reminded me who I'm supposed to be. She opened the envelope, her eyes tracing the words she'd dreamed of. "I just did what felt right, Mr. Hale." He shook his head. "And that's why you'll change more than this city." Across town, in a stark cell at a federal detention center, Clara Hale sat alone, the silence heavier than the concrete walls. The news played on a grainy TV in the common room, Maya's face flashing across the screen. Clara's hands trembled as she heard her own words again, from the audio that had sealed her fate. "If the girl keeps digging, we bury her first." The irony stung. She'd tried to bury the truth, but it had risen instead, carried by a teenager she'd never thought to notice. Derek Vaughn, in a separate facility, stared at a blank wall, his empire of lies reduced to a single number on his prison jumpsuit. The game was over and the board had been flipped by the girl they'd called insignificant. Back in their small apartment, Maya sat on the fire escape, the city's lights twinkling below like stars she could almost touch. Denise joined her, handing her a mug of chamomile tea. "You're not the same kid I raised," she said, her voice soft but proud. "You're something bigger now." Maya shook her head. "I'm still me, Mom. Just me with a purpose." Denise smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "Then keep being you, Maya. The world needs more of that." As the city hummed below, Maya looked out at the skyline, her laptop open to a new email from Victoria Chan. "We're just getting started. Ready for the next fight?" Maya's fingers hovered over the keyboard, a spark igniting in her chest. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The truth had won, but the world was full of shadows waiting for someone to shine a light. And that someone was her. Lessons from the Shadows. This story isn't just about Maya Williams or Pinnacle Ventures, it's about the power of seeing what others overlook. In a world that often values titles over truth, Maya's courage reminds us that anyone, no matter their background, can change the course of justice. Whether you're a student, a worker, or someone who feels invisible, your voice matters. Speak up, ask questions, and never let anyone tell you your place is to stay quiet. The smallest spark can light the biggest fire. If Maya's story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to My Amazing Stories for more tales of courage, truth, and the people who dare to make a difference. Drop a comment below. Tell us, what would you do if you found a truth worth fighting for? Let's keep the conversation going, and together, let's shine a light on the stories that matter.